today. I don't think I've ever done an event in this room. Sorry, it's very casual as I'm chatting here into the mic. We're going to get started. Just waiting for the rest of our speakers to get here. Oh, no, no. Dramatic. That's Anne. It's Anne Stuhldreher, everyone. You can sit up there if you, or you can stand next to me because I'm just going to be brief. Hello. Oh, Vicki, you can just sit up in a chair until we get going. That's my crap there, but you can move it. Just move my stuff. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead and sit, Larry. Sorry for that. Okay, I'm about to say good morning, but good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us in person. We actually have a lot of people live streaming, so hello to the country. And don't we love that technology allows us to stream this from all over the place and not just have to be in DC. But thank you for those of us who joined us in the room. We're thrilled to see your faces here. My name is Joanna Smith-Romani. I'm the Managing Director of the Financial Security Program here at Aspen. Our work is around sort of what our name implies, right? How to create the kind of policy and markets that support families reaching their full financial potential, all the way from stability to security in this country. We do work like the rest of Aspen, that's with the public and private sector. And so this event kind of fits into a larger theme of work we've been doing around consumer debt and the way debt impacts families. Before I briefly get into that, I wanted to thank the Annie Casey Foundation, who's been supporting a lot of our work on debt and on municipal costs and debt to families in particular. I know they're watching us from Baltimore. Hello, Annie E. Casey. And just give you a little background on our work. So for the past 18 months, we've been researching all about consumer debt, the drivers, the implications, the impacts on families and on communities. A big part of this that has been emerging around the country, and certainly since the Ferguson riots, were that state and local governments charge disproportionate fines and fees to families of color. And that is harming them, and that's harming cities, and it's harming communities. Today's conversation is adjacent to that. It's about a different kind of debt that the government is, accruing for folks or facilitating. But it's an important part of this kind of big debt cycle families are living in, a lot of which we can actually fix through policy. This isn't even really the private sector getting involved. So we think there's a lot of promise there. I also want to acknowledge that because this is adjacent to our fines and fees work, this isn't really FSP's core work. It's actually our friends at Ascend who are sitting here with us. They are a sister, brother, colleague, policy program, however you want to describe it. And they are just a really excellent group if you are not familiar with them. They've become a national hub for breakthrough ideas and collaborations that really look at 2Gen. They look at parents and children and their long-term success in all kinds of facets. They've been doing a lot of work around this area through their own, critical expertise and intelligence, but also through fellows they have in the country. And they are about to release a report that really says, which I think is such an important question as you listen to Anne in a moment in the panel, what if we redesigned our systems to think about what children need from their families to grow healthy and thrive as they move into adulthood? So what if like all the policies from the local to the federal level actually had core at the heart of it? What does it mean for children's well-being? And that's, that is how our economy thrives. And that's really been their focus and at the heart of their work. And it's a really amazing transformative program that they have there. So just to give a plug for them and a preview, a teaser, if you will, they're about to have a paper come out that actually is talking about these very issues, right? Because that is essential for children to thrive. Child support funds collected from the state can, and I know this is crazy, actually go back to the families that need them and the children that need them to thrive. Approaches to working with non-custodial parents that give them pathways for careers that actually allows them to re-engage with their family and with the workforce, and again, help children thrive. And thinking about how to decrease state-owed child support debt when there's relevant programming that the other parent is participating in. So again, this like in our minds throughout the next hour and a half is, what do we want our country to look like so that the heart of it is how children can do better? And how do we support all the kinds of adults and people that interact in their life to get there? So we're just thrilled to bring this program here. Again, it's essential to the families we think about at the Financial Security Program. It's adjacent, so we are not the experts, and that's why Anne is here, and I'll quickly introduce her and then let everyone get on stage, but really refer you to our really amazing partners at Ascend for the future of this work at Aspen, because they're really leading the important efforts here. So Anne, who I love dearly, is a fellow at the Financial Security Program, and she directs, and if you guys have not heard of this, please write this down, the Financial Justice Project. It is part of the San Francisco city government, and it is the first of its kind to have this kind of office embedded in the government to really do a reflective look at itself as a city on what are the kinds of fines and fees and policies that we have that harm our residents, right, that are not doing what the policy intended and in fact having a worse outcome than we could have had. It's provocative. It's really transformed, I think, how San Francisco thinks about its role in people's lives, and it's influencing work all over the country in a really important way. Just to brag about Anne very briefly, they've resulted in, they're only 2 years old, a little over 2 years, and they've advanced a lot of reforms, including the first to stop charging fees to people exiting jail in the criminal justice system. Again, if I put on my Ascend hat, that helps people, but that helps their families, right? That is critically important for children's success. They cut towing and booting fees in half for lower income folks. Can people, why charge someone if they can't pay? These things just make sense, and you don't need to be that punitive. The first to stop the suspension of driver's license for people who cannot pay traffic fines or appear for their court date. It's essential for being part of the community is how you get places and how you identify yourself. They've eliminated or created discounts for all kinds of fines and fees. And again, she's just, this work, it's not just her, and she'll be mad if I think it's just her. This coalition that they have created of advocates at the city and state level are inspirations to all of us of, again, how we put on our hats and say, what are children owed in this country, and how to create governments that serve that purpose well. So I am going to invite Anne over to the podium to talk about a really important new piece of research that's going to ground our conversation, and then we'll get into this panel, which does look large, but that's because these are amazing people you have to hear all their perspectives from. So thank you again for joining us. Hashtag Aspen Epic if you're tweeter people, and hello again to our friends coming in from all over the country. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you, Joanna. That was very kind and generous. And thank you, all of you, for fitting this into your day. It's a beautiful day in Washington, D.C. And thanks to all my fellow panelists, many of whom have really helped me over the last couple years. That I've been on a very steep learning curve about our child support system. And I am going to talk first about what we're up to in San Francisco and California. We've been looking at this problem, how this program can unfortunately place an inequitable burden on lower income people, people of color. And then I know California is sometimes we like to think we're a country, but we're not the country. We're very different in a lot of ways from the rest of the country. And then on the panel, we're going to have a chance to look at how some of these problems and challenges show up across the country and what some of the solutions are. And so, when we got started at the Financial Justice Project about 2 years ago, I kept getting this question whenever I met with community groups or residents or legal service providers, but mainly with residents who would usually come up to me afterwards and say something like, can you please do something about child support debt? And at first I was really puzzled. And I would think or say, why would the government want to wipe out this debt? Wouldn't that take money away from children? And then the person would say something like, oh no, that's the problem. I'm gonna try to, when I make a payment, it doesn't go to my children. And so I didn't understand then the way the system works. In California, when low-income fathers, and it's usually fathers, make child support payments, most of their payments go to pay back the government for the cost of public assistance received by the mother and child. This could be for Medi-Cal, for welfare, or for foster care assistance. So in California, for families that receive public assistance, only the first $50 of their payment goes through to their children. And so, because in California, 3/4 of child support cases involve low-income families, disproportionately families of colors, who either currently or previously received public assistance. In California, 70% of, I have another slide, of outstanding child support debt is owed to the government to pay back public assistance, and it is not owed to children. And of the parents who owe this public assistance payback debt, the vast majority earn less than $10,000 a year. And, as we started learning about this, we came together with organizations across California to write this report that we're calling the Payback Problem. And we also learned in that report that in California, low-income parents made about $368 million in payments child support payments that never went to their children. This money was, instead went to the government. So as we started learning about this, we were concerned about this practice that was really seemed to be stripping resources and wealth from families who really couldn't afford to lose it. And again, I just kept having people come up to me and ask me about it. And just, some of the folks I remember talking to were a gentleman named Ronell, who, when he was growing up, his father worked as a maintenance worker, paid about $600 every pay period, but only $50 of that went through to Ronell and his brothers. And they really could have used that money. He remembers his water being turned off, their electricity being turned off, having to go to the neighbors to take a shower. And, again, like these public assistance payback policies, don't just fail children. They also set up low-income fathers and some mothers who are paying child support to fail. And, can discourage, I think, people from paying child support at all if they think it's not going to go to their children. Another story I heard often was talking to folks who ran job training programs, and they describe a young man who got placed into a construction job, say, and then, up to half of his paycheck would be garnished to go to child support. And at first he would think, okay, like this is for child support, it's going to my kids. Then you may hear from the child's mother that actually they're just getting $50. This can breed like misunderstanding. And again, I think sometimes the system is hard to understand, even by folks that are participating in it. And we heard that sometimes, that young man might even get discouraged. And after this happens for a few paychecks, and figure maybe I'd be better working off the books, where my paycheck wouldn't be garnished, where everything I earned would come to me, so that I could better support my family. Oftentimes too, when parents don't pay, the penalties can really make matters worse. It seems to me, especially for lower income families, a lot of the penalties assume that people can pay but won't. But this isn't the case a lot of times. People simply, can't pay it. I want to show this. In California, we charge 10% interest on missed payments. And, so what this graph shows is that in California, a parent with $36,000 in public assistance payback debt could pay $50 every 2 weeks. And at the end of 30 years, they'd owe $400,000 because of the interest rate. And then this line at the bottom is the same person making the same payments, but in a state with zero interest rate, and they would have almost paid off their debt. In California and in lots of parts of the country, people can be jailed who cannot pay back public assistance, and the state can suspend the driver's license of people who miss a payment or more than 30 days late. As a contrast, in Alabama, your license won't get suspended for, about 6 months. None of this makes it very easy for parents who owe child support to get or keep a job. Again, so we really came together in California to see how we could make this system work better for low-income families, develop some recommendations, and also explore what we can do locally in San Francisco. And, I probably should have mentioned this kind of from the beginning, but a lot of the fixes that I'm talking about wouldn't affect middle and upper income, say, fathers who owe child support and who can pay but won't. They really should and must, but their support checks, when they send them, go to their kids and not to pay back the government. So one thing we did, I'm not going to talk about that. We'll talk about this. In San Francisco is we raised some philanthropic money to pay off the public assistance payback debt of about 30 fathers. We worked with our local child support program and the state and had this hunch that if we lifted this burden off of people, they would make regular and larger payments. And that's so far what we've been seeing. They're early results, but they're very encouraging. We also, I'm really excited that a lot of our recommendations are mirrored in bills that are advancing in California. So we really believe that when a parent makes a child support payment, that all of their payment should go to their children, and we should end these public assistance payback policies, as some other states have done. So there's a bill advancing to do just that. There is a bill to eliminate the interest rate, get it down to zero. There is a bill to stop the public assistance payback debt from growing while someone's incarcerated and they have no means to pay it. We're also working to minimize the use of driver's license suspensions and not jail parents when they can't afford to make payments. We're supposed to be moving away from debtors' prisons. Again, California's different. The problems and challenges with this program look different in other states. And I think at this point, I want to ask my fellow panelists to come up. And we're going to have a discussion about what some of the challenges look like across the country, and then also what some of the solutions are. Who I've been learning a lot from over the past 2 years. So to my immediate right is Tony Vinson. He's a recruitment and intake specialist at DC Central Kitchen. Next to him is Vicki Turetsky. She is the former commissioner of the Office of Child Support Enforcement in the US Department of Health and Human Services. Next to her is Nikki Thompson. Nikki is a senior policy associate at the Job Opportunities Task Force of Maryland. Next to Nikki is Heather Hahn. Heather is a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. Next to Heather is Peter Edelman, and he's a professor at Georgetown University Law Center. And all the way on the end is Larry Dabian, and Larry directs the Colorado Division of Child Support Services. So thank you again, all of you, for being here. And Peter, I'd love to start with you. Give us the context in which all of this is happening. What has happened with people living in poverty and living at the hard edges of the economy over the past couple decades?
Well, first I want to say great to see people here, and especially you, Anne, for putting all of this together. I met Anne when I was working on my book about criminalization of poverty, and she was getting started with this fantastic work that she's doing that you heard about, and there's much more to tell. So if I used up my 2 minutes, that's okay. What I want to do is essentially to talk about the larger frame, because what you have here is the most really remarkable group of people who know the ins and outs of and working on an everyday thing on child support itself. And what I'm going to say is something you already know, but nonetheless we should say it. Number one, and again I could just sit down, end poverty. Because that's in a significant way, although there certainly are people in large numbers who owe child support, but who can pay. But there is, as we know, a very large number of people who owe child support who can't. And that means that what we're looking at does connect to the issues of poverty generally. And we need to figure out, everybody who's working on child support and on policy, to hook it all together. And where we need to start with that is to understand what happened in 1996 with the creation of TANF. Because where we are now, depending on the way you do the numbers of it, 15 to 18 million people who have incomes that are below half the poverty line. And a significant part of that increase, the percentage is twice that it was in 1976. It's double that now. And a large part of that is because the cash assistance in our country is blasted. Now it differs. California has a program that's significant, and New York, and indeed between the two of them, almost 50% of the money that we're doing on TANF is just in those two states. And the rest of the other country, it shows you're talking that there are fewer than 3 million people in the country that get TANF. It was 14% when Clinton became president. So, and of those 3 million, as I said, they're in just 2 states. So this is why we have extreme poverty. And that's about moms and it's about kids. And if you think about the last time you heard anybody in a national discussion about cash assistance, the answer is you didn't. And it is really, it's horrible. It's not acceptable. And so we have a responsibility to do that. So that's the point that I wanted to make to the frame, or one of the frames anyway, for all of this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that context that in history that we all really need to keep top of mind, even though, as you said, we're not hearing about it.
And let me say, just one more, sorry. There's 7 million people in this country whose only income is SNAP. 7 million people where that's their only income. So just to add to that, sorry.
Okay. Peter, in addition, your latest book is called Not a Crime to be Poor. I have a copy in my backpack. I highly recommend it.
Did you want a third time?
And there's a chapter that is titled Child Support, Criminalizing Poor Fathers. What do you mean by that? How would you say child support criminalizes poor fathers?
Well, you've got the experts here. And so literally, I'm not going to say very much. I mean, okay. The point is that in many parts of the country, when a person owes child support and is unable to do that, and that's a lot of people, it's destructive for the family, for everything. It just is very, very damaging. And so when we use jail in relation to child support, it is criminalizing. That's my point.
Right. Thank you. Tony, I'm going to ask you a few questions now. So tell us about your work at DC Central Kitchen and the people you hire and train there.
Okay, so for many of you guys who may not know, DC Central Kitchen is a nonprofit organization in Northwest DC. We basically service the community. We service 5,000 meals out of our main kitchen that go to homeless shelters, halfway houses, transitional homes, drug and alcohol treatment programs. The means and the point when DC Central Kitchen was founded by our founder was to try to end hunger. That was his means. He was trying to feed our way out of hunger. And he found out shortly. Through our whole kitchen now, we do 13,000 meals a day to the community of DC. And those are going to 80 different organizations. So obviously, as you can see, we can't feed our way out of hunger. It will never happen. So what they ended up doing was creating a culinary job training program 22 years ago. And this is our 30-year anniversary, and we've trained upwards of 2,000 men and women in the culinary field, getting them employed. The kicker to that is these aren't just normal, typical men and women. These are individuals facing multiple barriers to employment, systemic barriers to employment, mass incarceration, felonies on your record, drug and alcohol addictions, struggles with homelessness, poverty, not having high school education, being Black, being from Ward 7, Ward 8. Like these are systemic barriers to employment. In a sense to that, because I'm the recruiter, I see upwards of we do 5 classes a year. I see upwards of 100 applicants per class session. So we're talking 500 individuals a year. One of the biggest things that come across when I'm interviewing individuals, because these are individuals coming from these multiple barriers to employment, coming from these struggles, coming from poverty, is their debts. And one of those huge debts is child support. I mean, some of it is, debts with probation and parole, fines and fees, things that they can't pay back either in that context either. They just continue to build and accumulate. But it's mostly about debts. And one of the debts that come up is child support, so.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So Nikki, at the Job Opportunities Task Force in Maryland, your mission is eliminating educational and employment barriers for low-wage workers. And you're aiming to transform systems and policies that create and perpetuate these barriers. And one of the many things you focus on is child support. And how in Maryland, do you see child support creating barriers for low-wage workers?
Okay, well, just to provide a little bit of context. So in Maryland, just in 3 zip codes in Baltimore City alone, there's about $30 million worth of child support that's owed to the state. And majority of it is state-owed child support. So as you mentioned earlier, it's for those who are on public assistance, on TANF, receiving some type of public benefit. And so how it creates a barrier to employment is, as you also mentioned, there's a de-incentivizing of employment because up to 65% of your wages in Maryland can be garnished from every check when you're in arrears. And that's 30 days in arrears. And so we know people who are living paycheck to paycheck trying to make ends meet. 30 days of arrears is very easy to come across. And then it also puts you in a cycle of, as has been mentioned, incarceration. You can have a body attachment issued in Maryland for your unpaid child support. Your driver's license gets suspended. Your registration is flagged if you're pulled over. Specifically, also, if you're a Black male that's pulled over, the likelihood of you being incarcerated and put in the criminal justice system is higher, especially in Maryland, especially in Baltimore City. So those are the barriers that it creates, and that's what we try to work to eliminate through the policies that we push at JOTF.
Yeah. And Nikki, is there an example of someone who comes to mind who you've seen face these barriers?
Wow, yes. So the other side of JOTF is a pre-apprenticeship program that's based in construction. And so our graduates have a financial case manager, and we work with them through their debts, like you mentioned. And the number one issue that we see all the time is child support. And so last year, in 2018, JOTF pushed forward a policy that would broaden an existing exemption program that allowed for folks to have their state-owed arrears forgiven if they made a certain number of payments. And so the program was very strict, very easy to get kicked out of the program. And so we allowed for folks who were unemployed to have a grace period. If they had been making payments prior to, they could be grandfathered in. And so we had a graduate who had about $10,000 of state-owed arrears. And once we passed that bill, which became effective October 1st, 2018, he went through the process and was able to get all of it forgiven. And so just seeing that relief off of him was really important to me, because it wasn't, you pass the bills and you do the work, but you don't always get to interact with the folks that it impacts. So that's a person that comes to mind immediately.
Right, right. Thank you. So Heather, you have studied child support system for many years. What do public assistance payback requirements look like across the country? I was going to ask you if this was just a problem in California. We heard it's a problem in Maryland as well. But what do you see?
Yeah, so it is a problem throughout the country, particularly around because people who are receiving TANF do not receive child support on their behalf. It goes to the state. There are only 3 states, Colorado, which we're going to hear from Larry, Colorado, Vermont, and Minnesota, that pass all of the money that's paid in child support to the families to whom it is owed. There are 27 states where none of the child support that is paid on their behalf reaches the family. And in the remainder of states, there's some amount, like in California where it's $50, it's usually $50 to $100 that goes to the family. Now, as Peter said, there are fewer and fewer people receiving TANF. So in some sense, it's a smaller and smaller problem. And yet for the people who are affected by it, it is huge for all the reasons that we've been talking about. So I really think there is this crisis of legitimacy. So even if there are just a handful of people who are affected by this, for those people who are not getting the child support that's paid on their behalf, or the people who are paying child support and it's not reaching their children, it's a big issue for them. A father said to me recently, it's called child support, but it's not even supporting the child. And so I think that just really highlights that legitimacy issue that the payback problem creates.
Right, right. Yeah. Whew. Just pausing on that for a sec. Again, you've looked at this program so closely. Like, what do you think people don't understand about it?
I think there are 3 things. And the most important thing is this misperception that people aren't paying child support because they don't care. And even some of the fathers who I've talked to who've been involved with the child support system said, I couldn't believe I was involved in child support because child support is for people who don't care. Non-custodial parent means the person who doesn't care. And I care. And so this narrative that fathers don't care is not only a false narrative, but it contributes to this system in which we think we need to punish fathers and force them to pay. And so there's this sense that you have to have these severe penalties or fathers won't pay. And that's not true. And so I think that that's the fundamental, most important thing. The second thing is that people just don't know that the child support isn't going to the families, that it's going to the state. And I think when people hear that, it's just like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And there are ways that you can rationalize it if you think really carefully and sideways, like, oh, maybe it should, but it just doesn't make sense to people. And I think that once they hear that, that opens people's eyes to how things could be different. And then the third thing, I don't think people understand the extremely punitive consequences that fathers face for missing payments. So we've heard about the interest in California and in many states. A father named Tim said, if I owe $5, and it was really like $500, if I owe $5, let's keep it at $5. Because if I'm having trouble paying $5, how do you think I'm going to pay $8, right? So that interest is really important. The seizure of the driver's license and professional licenses, even if you don't drive for a living, you need a car to get to work. You need a car to look for a job in many parts of the country. People don't know that you can have your bank account seized, your tax returns. One of the people we talked to was having his pension garnished. And then negative marks on credit reports. This is something I think people don't realize either. When you have that debt that you owe, each month that shows up on your credit report, and then there are all the repercussions of having a low credit score. So I think all of these punitive measures only make sense if you accept the narrative that fathers have to be forced to do this. And once you recognize that fathers want to pay and they simply can't pay and the money's not going to their children, the punitive measures don't make sense anymore.
Right, thank you. Vicki, you mentioned to me recently that you have been on both sides of the desk on this issue. Many years ago, you yourself received what was then called AFDC benefits, and you yourself have been described as a welfare success story. Flash forward many years, and you are running from the federal government the Office of Child Support Enforcement for 8 years in the previous administration. How did your experience receiving AFDC really shape your work when you were leading the Office of Child Support?
Well, for one thing, it gave me an abiding grudge against the payback policies. And I have pursued it ever since as a policy objective. When I received benefits, I appreciated it. I needed the help financially. Our family needed the help. I was grateful for the government help, but it was government help. My paycheck and the child support, they were my money. And when I learned about the rules that I had to sign over my right to my money, I felt it made no sense to me, but it also felt humiliating. I thought of myself as supporting myself, but I needed a little help. But by having to sign over my right to child support, it meant that I couldn't hold on to that sense that I was really a person with agency that was doing what I could to support my family. It was something that 40 years later still makes no sense to me. And I have, in the intervening years, done many things, and talking with families that I represented in legal services, talking to low-income fathers in a research project that I was involved with, they were saying the same thing. And that, for me, really, I had chosen a path into government and into policy work, and it reconfirmed for me what I knew all along, which this is crazy. And it continues to be a policy objective of mine. I think the other thing, just briefly, that I would say that I learned from being on the other side of the desk is that for programs to be legitimate in the eyes of the people who receive it, whether it's child support or something else, the rules have to make sense, and they have to be fair, and they have to be simple. And they have to be aligned with the way that people, mothers and fathers in this case, run their lives. If it's inconsistent with the way people decide about how to take care of their children, then family decision-making will be distorted by the policy and getting around the policy.
Right. Vicki, you have so much history in this space. Is there anything else on your mind at this point you want to
Yeah, I'm ready to retire, man. So I would say that to just speak a moment about where the child support community is and where we were in the Obama administration, we appreciate the dilemmas created by some of the policies that have been put in place even well before welfare reform. I mean, some of them come out of the Victorian era. We have been working hard to build the child support program around the family, what we call family-centered, centering the program around the needs of families and children. And nor were we the first administration to do this. There have been 3 administrations, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and now moving forward, that have funded research and put initiatives into place. And it has been a slow developing consensus within the child support community that practice and policies need to change and that the program needs to become more family-centered. And to just put a point on it, you know, my job, I didn't see my job as kicking off anything. I saw my job as bringing all of these ideas and initiatives and research into the core of the program, making it not just a exciting new adventure project, but actually standard practice in the child support community. And we were relying on 5 evidence-based practices in particular. First of all, realistic child support orders that are evidence-based, meaning evidence supports the amount of the order. Secondly, reducing debt. Third, reducing or eliminating the payback rules. Fourth, integrating employment services into one of the responses the child support program delivers. And fifth, co-parenting ties so that parents who pay child support can see their kids and there isn't that disconnect. These are all evidence-based. These are all due to researchers, and Elaine Sorensen is in the audience. These are all research-based policies that have been shown to be effective in helping families and delivering more child support.
Yeah. Thank you, Vicki. Larry, so you have done in Colorado what we're hoping to do in California, and you are among the first to stop requiring parents to pay back public assistance through their child support payments. Can you tell us what you did and why?
Certainly. Well, I want to start by saying thank you, Anne, for the invitation to be here, and it's nice to reconnect with Vicki and see Elaine Sorensen, because the work that both of them did, Vicki with CLASP and then OCSC Commissioner, and Elaine with Urban Institute, has guided the work in Colorado for many, many years, so it's nice to see you both here. In April of 2017, Colorado implemented a policy change that we call pass-through. And it was basically that we are now passing through the monthly current child support payments that are made by parents with child support obligations. We no longer call parents non-custodial parents, it's parents with child support obligations. But we pass those through every month to the family who deserves to receive that. Senator Cofalis, who is a very progressive senator in the Colorado's General Assembly, had put together a legislative work group that it consists of advocacy groups, legislators, County Department of Human Services representatives, and folks at the Department of Human Services, and worked on this project for a long time. And what was critical with this is that, and you hear this when I talk to my colleagues in other programs, counties and state child support programs rely on funding from retained collections for TANF to help pay for the work that they do. So our county partners made very clear to the sponsor that in order to support this legislation, there needed to be funding to backfill their loss of revenue. And the General Assembly was so supportive of this that they did that. So in April of 17, we began passing through the full amount of current child support to families. And one of the things that we did in the planning for this is we didn't want the payment of child support to kick someone off of TANF. So we worked together with our TANF colleagues in the Department of Human Services and the Child Support Program is Human Services in Colorado. We put together some rules that said that the payment of child support would not be a reason to kick someone off TANF unless there were 6 consecutive months of payments of at least $500 per month. And we used data to come up with that calculation. So we're very proud of the work that we did with our county partners, our advocacy groups, to implement that change of April in 17, and it's just going gangbusters in terms of the amount of money that's going to families now.
Yeah, tell us some more about how is it going gangbusters?
Sure.
What's the result?
We have a little smaller caseload than some of the other states in the country, but basically we are now collecting about $4.8 million annually that's passed through to about 2,000 families a month. What we found is that each family that receives child support through pass-through is getting about $174 a month. That is a big impact for families that are some of the poorest in our state, that in addition to their TANF grant, that they're getting $170 per month in child support. What we're also finding is parents that owe the child support are very appreciative of the fact that that money is now going to the family. And in terms of our outreach, prior to the implementation of the policy, we reached out to parents that owe child support and said, beginning in April of 17, your money you pay is going to go to the family. Prior to that, there were a lot of informal arrangements where a parent would maybe pay money directly to the TANF recipient because they wanted the dollars to go to the family. So we educated the parents about the fact that the child support you pay now is going to the family. We educated the receivers of TANF to say, although it is a requirement to cooperate with child support, there's a benefit for you to do that. And we have seen an increase of 17% in the child support order establishment rate as a result of our pass-through program. And we've also seen an increase from 23% payment rate of the cases prior to April of 17 up to 32% of the cases on a monthly basis are now getting child support. And it's also beneficial to the counties. They know that actually administer the child support program because they don't have to make that tough argument about why the money's being kept. So it just makes sense from a lot of fronts. And the sponsor did a great job of getting broad-based support, bipartisan support from legislators, and there really was not a lot of opposition to the legislation.
And is there any advice you'd have for other states
Certainly.
like us in California
Certainly.
that would want to do the same?
Right. I would guess California is similar to what we found in Colorado because it is a revenue source to at least in our state, to the local jurisdictions. It was critical to have general fund dollars appropriated on an annual basis to cover the cost of that. So that was something that was very, very important in terms of getting support with our county partners and having the legislation going through. Outreach to parents in advance of implementation of this is very, very important to share with both the payers of child support and also the receivers so that you get that level of cooperation. And also, we did a lot of training with our child support professionals and our TANF professionals in the counties to change the messaging when they work with families to move away from you have to cooperate as a result of you receiving TANF, but rather this is a benefit to you and your children. Let's work together to get good locate information, get an order established, and get collections coming in. And then the messaging also to the payer of the child support to say the money you pay is now going to be going to the family. So I think that was very, very important to us as well. So I think that's kind of a high-level overview, and certainly be willing to share other information with states that might be interested in implementing this kind of change.
Yeah, thank you. And Larry's already been very generous in talking to us in California about this. So Vicki, during your time in the past administration, your office implemented something called the Final Rule. What is the Final Rule?
It actually has a longer name, but we'll call it the Final Rule. It was promulgated, adopted in 2016. And it covers it has many moving parts, but most of those parts would be boring to you. They're operational. And I'm going to focus on 5 particular provisions that the rule contains. And just to understand what the rule does, it requires states to implement these provisions as a condition of federal funding. The rule, in other words, is not just guidance for states, but it is a mandatory requirement. And some of the rule provisions focus on state guidelines. Every state is required to have a set of state guidelines that guide decision makers, courts, judges, in setting child support orders. And every 4 years, every state is required to review their guidelines based on data to determine whether the guidelines, still make sense, whether they need to be adjusted. What the rule requires is that in the state's regular 4-year review process of its state guidelines, the state must implement this set of policies. So the implementation date is staggered. Essentially, states had up to 5 years and have about 3 years left, I think, to implement these provisions. So depending upon where states were in the cycle, they either have or haven't engaged this discussion yet. So the first is a requirement that all child support orders in the state be based on earnings, income, and evidence of ability to pay. And that I stress the word evidence, not assumptions, evidence of ability to pay. And child support agencies are responsible for developing a factual basis for that to help the court out. The second requirement in the rule is for child support order amounts to recognize the amount of money that somebody needs to support themselves. So you can't strip people bare of their income, but rather you have to make an allowance for self-support and self-sufficiency. The third requirement in the rule is that states must, if they use a policy called imputation, it has different names in different states. It's imputation, it's attribution, it's potential income, it's voluntary unemployment, voluntary impoverishment, minimum wage orders. These are all names for the same phenomenon, which is that a court will sometimes, and sometimes often, routinely, order an amount that is based on exaggerated or assumed income that doesn't really exist. It's fictitious income. And to do so with the best of intentions to provide for the family. But there's no money, there's no money. And what the research is clear about is that when you set an order beyond the ability to pay, you don't create more payments, you create more debt that doesn't get collected, and so families don't benefit. What the rule requires is that states limit this practice and that imputation be used only in circumstances, traditional circumstances really in the law, where the parent there is evidence that the parent has voluntarily quit employment or gone on a vacation, but pleading that there's no money. Intentional, deliberate, purposeful acts by a non-custodial parent to evade child support payment by pleading lack of resources. It's an evidentiary gap rule. It's existed forever in family law. It is applied that way in middle-class families. Long, long decisions by the court on whether there was or wasn't enough evidence to support adding extra money to the ledger in setting the child support order. For poor parents, usually men, often black men, not so much. Next. As people in cases go through the court system, orders get routinely ordered based on fictitious imputed income. The rule requires evidence and requires a case-by-case determination about whether or not, in fact, there is voluntary unemployment. Fourth, most states have done away with this based on some research done a decade or two ago, but the rule prohibits states from creating a barrier to modifying orders, reducing orders when someone is incarcerated. That is a time when a lot of debt builds up. Elaine's research found that. The normal rules are that if you have a change in your life, you can ask to have your order modified. But some states were throwing up that barrier during incarceration. This rule does away with that barrier and requires states to give notice to parents who are in prison of their right to have their order reduced, and allows states to do it automatically, drop that order to zero when they learn that somebody's been incarcerated for a length of time. The fifth requirement is based on a U.S. Supreme Court case called Turner versus Rogers, and it implements that decision. And it says that you may not send somebody to jail for non-payment of child support in a civil contempt action if they have no ability to pay, and shifts the burden to proving inability to pay from the non-custodial parent to the person bringing the contempt action. And states are required, state child support agencies are required to work up the case and screen the case to determine ability to pay before they bring any contempt actions. And that will change some states' practice dramatically, and will not change other states' practice because they already do that. And just one last thing, the proposed rule Also contained funding for employment services for non-custodial parents. We did take that out of the rule despite overwhelming support for it in public comment at the behest of Republican leaders in Congress.
So it sounds like we all who are working at the state level really need to be paying attention. Like
Right.
a lot, I know that full and true implementation of the final rule in California is really going to move us in the right direction.
That's right. I mean, because every state has got to review their guidelines with an eye towards conforming to the federal requirements and generally updating their rules, it means that states will be, so to speak, state legislators will be in the space. They will, there will be activity around child support changes and reexamination of policies that are called for by the federal rule. This is an opportunity for advocates and programs and state administrators and county administrators alike to shape a broader swath of policies. For example, the payback policy is not in the rule, but it is in federal statute. Under federal statute, states have the authority to pay 100% of the money to families. And so the question here is, does the state want to take up that option that's already in federal law? This is an opportunity, as California has taken, as Maryland is taking, to raise this issue as well as the requirements, to raise this optional issue. Is this the time to change the rules on payback? And is this the time to change the rules on debt? And I would just say states and counties, again, there are initiatives in this area, in the area of family-centered child support, in the area of these rule reforms across the country. Most states are doing something in this area, and you can help push it along.
Yes, thank you. So Nikki, I know the task force was advancing some reforms in the Maryland legislature in 2019. What reforms were you all putting forward and how did it go?
So unfortunately, we're still working on the implementation of the final rule. So all of the reforms we were trying to push through this past session were all the federal requirements. So allowing for minimum orders, allowing for the ability to pay, to be part of the determining of the child support order, distinguishing between actual unemployment versus voluntary impoverishment, not having orders being established during any type of detainment, whether that's rehab, any type of medical treatment, and also criminal detainment. And so, like I said, we're still trying to push through those reforms, and we weren't able to make it out. We have a 90-day session, so there's a lot that has to be done in 90 days. This is a 2-year work group that put these reforms together, so we were really hoping that this would be the year, and unfortunately we'll have to come back again next session. But all of these reforms are really pointed to distinguishing between a parent that is deadbeat versus a parent that's just broke. They're just dead broke, and they just don't have it. And unfortunately, the way that our system is currently set up, your financial capability is directly correlated to your parental capabilities, and that's just not true. And so the reforms that we were trying to put through are really trying to disaggregate that really false narrative that there's some type of connection between the two, because it's not. And also, we were trying to get through the self-support reserve as well, and it was one very loaded package that just took a lot of baby stepping with the legislators for them to understand not only are these federal requirements, but these are necessary for us to move into the right direction.
Yeah. What are the big challenges, would you say, you're going to need to overcome in Maryland to pass these things? And do you have ideas yet about how to overcome them?
So obviously there are the idealistic challenges, just the not understanding that they're state owed versus what is actually owed to the child. Automatically everyone thinks that you're a bad person because you're trying to reduce child support owed. The stares that I get sometimes when I walk into rooms and I say, we should reduce child support payments, they're glaring stares. But it's just based off of they're not fully understanding how the system works and how punitive it is for those who owe. So that's that's the first barrier. And then number two, really getting them to understand that there are these federal requirements that have to get pushed through. And then we also have the ability in statute to pass through 100%. In Maryland, we pass through $50, which is a great step forward, but it's not incremental enough for the families that need it. So really getting the legislators to understand how it works, what the system is really intended to do, how it's actually working. Very few of them understand how it's actually working. They don't get that you can go to jail in Maryland for not paying your child support. They don't believe it, but it's true. And so those are the obstacles. They seem like they're very small, like I should just be able to have a conversation to get a legislator over that hump. But it's not the case. That's just not the case. So, but we've been working steadily. We have a work group pulled together that is invested from all sides, the administration, and also from advocates and also practitioners that actually practice child support and family law. So I definitely think that we've had a huge briefing. I think we'll come back next year and be successful, I hope, fingers crossed.
And Nikki and I exchange emails about all this stuff at odd hours, so I know you're working hard at it. So Heather, I just saw you in San Francisco a couple weeks ago, and I'm very excited the Urban Institute and Heather is evaluating our debt relief program. And I just, it sounds like you had some really good conversations with some of the fathers who are participating, and I just wondered, what you wanted to share with us from that.
Yeah, it was just so interesting and heartbreaking and heartwarming to talk to these fathers. So all of these fathers were in San Francisco. They owed child support debt to the state that they were actively paying, and they also were actively paying support to their children. And through this philanthropic effort, their debt was wiped out. So now they're only paying support directly to their children. And so this happened a year ago, and we got to talk to them just a couple weeks ago about what it meant to them, like how it was that the debt accrued and how that felt, and how it has been since the debt was relieved. And in a nutshell, what they said about trying to pay back the assistance was they had to choose between paying child support and supporting their child. Because the child support money was going to the state, and they didn't have money left to actually do things with their children, to give them gifts or do meaningful activities that cost some money. And so some of the fathers said they actually tried to avoid their children because they just felt so bad about having to say, no, I can't afford to take you to the movies. I can't afford to buy you that. But with the debt relief, they talked about now that they had a little more money in their paycheck, what they were doing with their children. So one father's payments decreased. He was paying $600 something a month, and now he's paying $85 a month. And he took his family to Disneyland. And all the fathers were just beaming when they talked about what they did with their kids. Why did I tear up? Because he teared up when he told this story. He said, we went to Lake Tahoe and we saw snow for the first time. It's like, all the fathers were like crying telling these stories. Another one said, I think he only had just an extra $50 in his paycheck, but he took his kids to the movies. And he said, we spent more than $50, but this was such a huge celebration that we could do this, that we couldn't do before. So they really just talked about making memories. And for several of the fathers, this debt relief was really a tipping point in their lives. 2 minutes already. They... yeah.
I'm not counting.
This was going on for hours. But it was a tipping point in their lives where they felt like when things were going bad, it was just snowballed in a bad way. I want to tell you Artie's story, if I can try to do it very quickly. So Artie and his partner broke up shortly after their baby was born, and she moved a few hours away. He was paying $700 a month, but that meant he couldn't afford rent. And he lived in his car. He couldn't afford to renew the registration on his car, so he couldn't actually drive his car even to go visit his child. So he had this debt. When he heard about the debt relief and he was to show up to talk about this, he thought it was a sting operation. He knew he could go to jail for not paying child support. He knew he owed this debt. He said he left his phone at home and went in expecting to be arrested. And that's how he felt about the child support system. And so then he found out his debt was actually eliminated. And what this meant for him was his credit score increased from 400 something to 600 something. He could now qualify for an apartment and pay the rent. He could get his car back. He's working for Lyft and working as a bartender. So he now has housing, he has a job, and he's hoping to get partial custody of his child now that he has a place for them to be. And just the overall stress relief that came from the relief of that debt was just enormous. They talked about how it affected their mood. One guy, Jeff, just said he didn't realize how much it was affecting him until it was gone. Mm-hmm. But many of them talked about they have more patience now, both with their children and with the mothers of their children, so their relationships are stronger. There had been something haunting them. This debt was haunting them, and now it's gone. So I could go on and on, obviously. We do have a report that will come out in the summer with more of this information, but that's just a bit of what we heard.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Tony, you know, when you think about the men and women that you work with, you know, every day at DC Central Kitchen, you know, what would you like policymakers to keep in mind when they're making decisions about our child support system?
Well, I think maybe they should keep in mind what Colorado's doing. I mean, maybe that'll be a little bit more beneficial for the whole country. Real quick, because I was probably the only one up here who followed the 2 minutes, I kind of left my comments brief because I thought we was all following schedules and stuff. So I kind of left out the fact that I too suffer from child support debt as well myself. I'm actually a graduate of DC Central Kitchen myself. I came to DC from Colorado in a sense to change my life. And when I got here, I enrolled into the culinary job training program, graduated, and was hired as a recruiter, and was instantly affected by having child support debt. Obviously, I knew when I went in, I had child support debt. I was paying child support to my daughter at the time on every once in a while, because the way we set it up, the way me and my ex had set it up, we were doing some behind the scenes, you know, messing around, like we were double dipping basically. So we were trying to set it up to where I was paying child support, and then I was still, you know, living with her. She was getting a cut on, you know, the whole housing situation because it was through TANF, so she was paying X-words like $17 a month. But I had to pay the child support. That was the kicker. So I obviously wasn't paying it. I was giving her money, and we were living together, and you know, I was chalked up as a deadbeat dad. So I started that debt then. That was 2008. I go to prison 2010, and nobody told me I needed to modify my payments. So it continued to just go up, up, up. So 2014, still in prison, I was brought up from my ex to basically give up parental rights to my child, which means that all this could go away. I could wipe all this out right now. I just got to sign on the dotted line. Nope, ain't gonna do it. I cared very deeply about my daughter. I still do to this day, even though I have not seen her since 2010 when she was 3 years old. However, fast forwarding now, when I came home, got DC Central Kitchen, graduated. The very first year I was out, my auntie wanted to take me to Cancun. I was working at DC Central Kitchen 6 months, had been out a year, doing very great. She was like, put in for a passport. I was like, I ain't gonna get it. I got 6 felonies on my record. There's no way they're gonna give me a passport. Put in for it anyway. I mean, not really struggling with money, but you know, I'm just getting back on my feet. So I'm trying to save things. I'm trying to, you know, one day, you know, get a house, you know, get a car, things of that nature. So I paid the $300 to expedite it. I wanted to go to Cancun. Never been out of the country ever in my life. They denied it, not because of my 6 felonies, because of child support. Never knew that. Never knew that. And then also too, and kudos to Larry. I've been struggling with trying to get credit established as well too. I've had a hard inquiry on my credit score for $15,000 for, I'm sure, all this accumulating and things of that nature. Never been able to establish credit. Don't even have credit. Never even tried. But since I've been home, I've been trying to establish, and it keeps coming up. You know, so I'm starting to get these hard inquiries on my credit score because I'm trying to establish credit. But because of that, you know, child support debt. They weren't giving it to me. Just found out from Larry, Colorado passed a law to wipe out all, 160,000 cases. I didn't believe him at first because I just checked 2 months ago and I seen it on there. I just checked it just right before when we were back in the green room, and it's off. So,
Oh my God,
yeah.
wow.
I mean, when you talk about the huge relief, like seriously, like I got goosebumps right now. Like that's crazy. I mean, but what I want policymakers and people to understand is that we're real people. You know what I mean? We're real people. Like, we do have hearts. We are, and this is circumstantial, kind of what you were saying. This is case by case basis. I mean, if you see the background, what I just explained to you guys, me and my ex was doing some, side stuff. We were trying to, and now it led to destroying my life in the future when I'm trying to change my life. And that's beneficial for individuals coming home from prison that already have these multiple barriers to employment. They don't need another one. There's not, I mean, you can't keep taking it. Imagine somebody that wasn't successful like myself coming home and having this over their head. And you're on parole, you're on probation, and they're steadily wanting you to pay this, do that, and you still have to pay child support too. You're gonna go under, and you're gonna start thinking criminally again, and you're gonna be right back in prison. It's a cycle of abuse. So that's all I want them to understand, that we're real people too. And not everybody's a deadbeat dad. Not everybody falls into that criteria. So, but I thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're going to open it up for questions, but Peter, I wanted to check back in with you. Yeah, anything on your mind at this point you want to add to the conversation?
That's wonderful, Tony. That is just wonderful to hear that.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I think that I can say very briefly, connect to what Tony was talking about, because there's so many things about child support that connect on to other things. And, it's like you already got 26 hours a day in your work, but you're doing some of that inside. You were telling me about the fact that as the child support agency, you're working with people to help them get a job. That it's not, this is me talking, some of your agencies in the state maybe isn't doing what they should, and so you're taking the responsibility. So that's one kind of thing, figuring out the connections. And that obviously we could think through other pieces, health pieces, mental health pieces, other kinds of things that needs to connect, housing and so on. The other thing on just what you went through is that the book and having a chapter in it is because it is part of this very large thing, not just mass incarceration, which we know about, which certainly is connected to this, as we've already said, but also connected to that, we're now knowing, particularly after Ferguson, Missouri, that all these fines and fees and the problems with bail, they're very much connected. You get put in jail for issues that relating to child support, and a whole bunch of other things starts happening, because there are all kinds of fees that are connected to that. It's not about the child support itself, but that gets adding to it, and so it's people don't understand that. I mean, you found in San Francisco that they were paying, in the bluest city in America, they were charging probation $50 a month in San Francisco. That's her first. That's where we met. Because I didn't forget that. And so when you look at, you think about the driver's licenses. You're talking about that. Over 40 states are taking away people's driver's licenses. It's an industry. People are owing money, and we don't even have the numbers nationally. There's a number of $50 billion out there. But anybody who really knows about it, it's way much more money that's owed, and it's part of it's for profit. But a lot of it, like in San Francisco, these things are agencies that in the old days, the way they ran is you got a service. Now you have to pay for absolutely everything. That's all connected to all of us, so that's what I want to add.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I wanted to, are there any questions at this point? I could keep asking all of them questions all day. Joanna?
I can start while other people think. I had the privilege of thinking ahead because I knew we were doing this event. My mind is blown right now in so many ways, technical term, just blown mine over this, and just so grateful for all the perspectives on the stage and for you guys spending your time here. Larry, I'm wondering this piece that I hadn't fully considered about the revenue as like a practical political consideration, and you may have something to say here too, Nikki. I
Well,
suspect you do.
And that's what I was talking about too, because getting the revenue for all of the fines and fees, it's huge to get
Yeah.
them to stop taking that money.
Well, right. And well, this connects to some of the work I feel like I learned from you, Anne, that I might be being oversimplistic by, and our own fines and fees work that Devon and I have been working by. But there's not a full collection anyways, right? There's a lot. I mean, this is where the debt comes from. So I'm actually curious, as a practical matter for Colorado, like what did you have to secure from general funds, like what they hoped they would get, or as a practical matter, what they are actually, the state is actually bringing in revenue from the debt they're trying to collect, how big of a burden that is to come up with. And Nikki, just before we started, you said, Maryland's about to be in a budget crisis this coming year. So just trying to figure out where you would come up with that money. So I'm really interested in this like practical political consideration.
Yeah, one of the things that my office provided to Senator Cavallis and the group was if this policy change went into effect, what actually was collected on the current TANF cases for the prior couple of years. And so we knew what the county portion of that was. We knew what the federal portion of that was, because the feds expect certain amounts over $100 for one child orders and anything over $200 a month for multiple child orders. So we used actual data to say what would it cost to implement this. So that was part of the fiscal note that was attached to it, an annual appropriation. And because the program has been so successful, we've had to go in for supplementals to ask for additional dollars, because the money has really increased substantially. And I know in discussions with my colleagues in other state child support directors, I think they're very much interested in this idea, but they have that concern about the revenue piece, that if they were to do this without revenue considerations, what would they have to stop doing in terms of their overall caseload? So I think that's just a real life factor as far as looking at pass-through.
Yeah, and I guess I just would like to interject from in California, and Elaine, I think it was your study, I believe, that showed that the public assistance payback debt in California, and these are estimates, but that it looked like about 95% of that debt was uncollectible. But still, even with that 5%, there's still revenue at stake, and it's revenue that's going to fund in California the safety net. And so, that's going to be, it's a big discussion, and one that we're, having, I think, some good dialogue around in California.
If I can just add, the revenue loss that would result, or that does result from making sure all the money goes to families, is much less than it was 2 decades ago. I mean, there's some good news here in that this is the flip side of a rapidly declining TANF caseload, is that there is less revenue balled up in this policy. And so, a case can be made that now is the time to do it, because we've gotten to a level of revenue that is not as severe. Its loss would not be as severe as 10, 20 years ago. And there are a number of offsetting savings. Just to name one, Wisconsin pass-through research found that there were fewer child maltreatment reports as a result of money being passed through. That is a tangible savings to states. To name a second, technology and customer service and training costs are estimated to be significantly lower with full pass-through. So there's ways to calculate the loss of revenue, to offset the cost of revenue. It's not as much as you think. In fact, Wisconsin found that there was no net cost to the state as a result of passing through the money that they did. So they're thinking creatively about the revenue and really looking at a bigger picture, as Peter keeps saying, about where, yes, there's a loss of revenue. What are the savings, and what are the intangible social benefits that can result later in costs to the state?
I actually have a quick follow-up. So first, thank you so much. And I think, kind of diving deep into a specific fine or fee associated like this can really help bring more resolution to other fines and fees in states and municipalities. And so I'm wondering, Larry, in terms of these savings, because a consequence of not paying child support is very similar to not paying other fines and fees. So in Colorado, are you seeing less incarceration and lockup due to non-payment and less late fees, which can offset that revenue in the 2 years or year and a half that this has been developing? And is there any research or paperwork that we can read up on afterwards to kind of dive deeper ourselves into what Colorado's been doing?
We're actually working with the University of Denver Sharp Fellow to do an evaluation that should be available in this summer. So we certainly will share that broadly. We don't do a lot of contempt citations in Colorado. Very, very few. There's a few counties that use problem-solving courts, and they use contempt citations, but it's not to put someone in jail. It's to provide opportunity for parents to get connected to the resources they need. So I think it would be very interesting to look at what are the benefits of passing through in terms of less TANF reliance, less SNAP reliance, but there's a lot of intangible measurements. I've spoken with many parents who are very excited about this, that they're now able to pay their child support and connect with their families, and that's really what we're trying to do in our state. So one thing I just wanted to throw out, if I take just maybe a minute, is in terms of working with the child support programs in your states, I would encourage you to have some conversations about if the child support guideline amounts, particularly at the low income level, are at the right levels, because we've done some analysis and have found that compliance rate for low income parents using our child support guidelines was very, very low, like in the 25 to 30% rate. So we're actually in our state legislature now trying to get a new minimal order and more self-support reserves. So I would encourage you to talk to your state child support programs and do some data analysis and see if those child support amounts in their guidelines, particularly for low-income families, what's the compliance rate? And if it's like it was in Colorado, it may point out a need for some modifications to that.
Thank you all so much. I'm wondering if any of you guys have studied how family court systems, alternative to typical court systems, could help abate some of the problems that come up with establishing child support orders and making sure that families stay connected. Have any of you guys studied that at all?
Yes, not in a research sense, but in a policy sense. The person sitting next to you, however, has. There are, Larry referred to problem-solving courts. That is sometimes they're called fathering courts, sometimes they're called accountability courts, sometimes they're called co-parent courts. They have different names, but they all have a model that is court-based, that is essentially a diversion program. You come into court, and your case is monitored. You are offered a set of services, usually including employment services in the case of child support and other social services, as a condition of, staying right with the law, I guess, staying right with the court. And there are a number of states that have problem-solving courts for child support specifically, and obviously there are also drug courts and veterans courts, and it's a part of a larger thing. And I don't have research data to tell you, but I can tell you anecdotally that they are effective in changing individual case trajectories, meaning parents who go through a problem-solving court come out with a better outcome from a subjective vantage point and also from a payment vantage point. It's a model that the judiciary itself, national judicial groups, have been promoting. The judiciary in Maryland is promoting them in other fields, and it's a really an area where I think the judiciary is receptive to learning more about and implementing child support-based problem-solving courts.
But I just want to add, for JOTF, our perspective is intervening before the court process even begins, because that's when we find you can actually make the most impact. So specifically in Baltimore City and in Baltimore County, they allow for mediation to happen before you need to modify an order, before you even get to the process of going to court. And that, number one, we feel is very helpful because you're dealing with your caseworker who has very intimate knowledge of not only the non-custodial parent, but the custodial parent, because they've been working with them through the process. Just going to court in general is a very adversarial process, and for anyone. So being able to take the entire situation outside of the courtroom, we find is very, very beneficial. And in some instances, we find folks walk away not deciding to even go through with the child support order establishment because they've been able to walk through the entire process and learn all of the consequences that come along with that before you even get to the court stage. So that's been very beneficial in certain jurisdictions in Maryland.
I agree with Nikki.
I think we're getting towards the end of our time. That has certainly flown by for me. And, I just want to say, just hearing all of this, I feel like now more than ever that the time is now, really to reform this system. I'm excited about all the momentum around the country. I am hopeful about what we are trying to do in California. And, again, we're seeing people, really come together and agree that, these reforms are the right things for families and really the right thing for all of us. I just really want to thank all of our panelists. I know I learned a lot today, and I really appreciate it. Joanna, Devon, I don't know if you all want to. Yeah, I really hope we can continue this conversation, at the reception. And just please join me in thanking our panel once again.
Well, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.